I know we don't have follow formal Robert Rules of Order. It is 5:30, so we would like to get the Joint Finance Committee meeting started. We have a very short agenda this evening. We have primarily just a couple items that we want to go over. And the agenda has been shared with Dr. Blizzard, and he is not able to make it. And I also understand that we have some other participants that weren't able to make it tonight, so we're going to continue on with the citizens' perspective for the process. Mr. Haney, Mr. Brand, is there anything that you'd like to add before I jump in?
No.
Luttrell, anything you'd like to add before I jump in? Okay. All right, so the first thing we'd like to do is go over the process that was used last year. So last year was the first year of the Joint Finance Committee, and there were two primary goals to the process. One was that we wanted to have a transparency in the budget, and there were two elements of transparency. One was the budget was submitted in major classifications along with line items, and the process that was used by both the county and the school system was observable and transparent. That goal was fully met. So the budget was submitted in the line item. We did have the categories. There were presentations on the process, and that was transparent. The second goal was to have the budget completed in a timely manner. And this one, actually, the process was timely from the time it started. The budget on the school side was submitted about 2 months late, and the process that the board completed was equally 2 months behind the estimated time frame. So from a timeliness perspective, the timeline moved to the right 2 months on both sides. So that was something I think that we all had agreed we would like to try to improve. The benefit of having the process shift, if you will, was that there were multiple rounds of questions that were able to be asked and answered, and all those were made public and transparent as well. So I want to ask the two board members from the Board of Supervisors, 2 out of 3 of the goals were met. I wanted to get your thoughts on the success and or challenges with the process before we move into the next part.
I think you covered it. It's just getting the budget from the school board and us coming to a decision on what to do with the budget. It's just carried over.
It was 2 months on each side, right?
Yep.
So it wasn't like one was longer.
Yep.
The process just took a little bit longer.
Yep.
But there was a lot of transparency, a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, it was a lot of information. Takes time to get information. Can't just get it and drop of a hat, it takes a little bit more time. You get information, and there's another series of questions coming from the information that you just got. So, the process probably needs to start sooner than later.
And that's where I think the transparency was, I think that goal was exceeded, because there was so much information that was shared and there were so many questions that were asked. Some of the questions led to more questions that we didn't necessarily get all the answers to, but the process was great from my perspective. I thought it was good. So I'd like to do no more than a few minutes. I'd like to ask folks, and this is something that we do in this group, Dr. Blizzard and I said we'd like to make sure we do this. From the process that was done last year with respect to the transparency of the budget process, does anyone have any thoughts about whether you liked the transparency, whether it lacked transparency, or whether you'd like to see different transparency this year? And just so you know, silence is consent. That means that the transparency was where it should be. All right. Timeliness, I know that's a really tough one, so I'm actually not going to ask a whole lot of input on that one because it's not something that you guys can control. So the timeliness with respect to the budget means that the school and the school board have to go through the process of building it. The school board has to vote on it, then it has to get submitted to the county, then it gets rolled up into the county process, and then it gets presented, and then it has to be reviewed and acted on. So from the perspective of the timeliness, I'm going to defer any comments on that because that's not anything that we can do, we as citizens or a body can do to change. The transparency, I think, is the biggest piece, and if you guys are thinking that's where it should be, then I think we're in a good spot for this part of the goal for this year. Okay. So now I'll move into the budget management quarterly review.
Actually, can I make a comment?
If it's only on one of those two things right now, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
We glossed over the things that we didn't exceed on, and we focused on the things that we did exceed on.
Those were the 3 goals we had. What goal did you have that we didn't?
Well, I think that the timeliness issue needs to be discussed.
Okay.
This is something you do every year. It's not a surprise. There should be a standard process. This is not an onerous exercise that takes, heavy lifting that's different year to year. It's completely predictable. So why a 2-month delay in issuing the budget?
So you would need to ask the school board why it took them 2 months to get it to this body first, and we don't have a school board rep here.
Right, well, I want to note that that we kind of glossed over the things that we didn't do great at.
No,
And timeliness was one of those.
timeliness is one of them.
Yeah.
And what I'm saying is I'm the Board of Supervisors rep on this. I can't speak to the timeliness of the school board
But
budget.
ask the Board of Supervisors, what can we do to make sure that the budget is issued on time?
The school budget?
Yeah.
I-
It's not a surprise.
I agree, and I think there's a school board meeting on Monday, and I think that'd be an excellent opportunity to ask that. I've been speaking at the school board meetings for the last 6 months. They had presented a budget. It's not been voted on yet, so I will see you at the school board meeting on the 10th, and let's ask that together.
Yep.
Okay? Thank you. Kim, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm Karen.
Can I make another comment? Part
If
of
it's on these 2 topics.
Part of the timeliness issue was also folds into the transparency issue, which is the questions that were asked and answered led to other questions that needed to be asked and then answered. And so part of the timeliness issue, net of when things were submitted, was the transparency of we have additional questions. And to the extent that those questions led the Board of Supervisors to the decisions that they made, it was an important lag time, in my opinion, that those questions be put forth, be published, and the school have a chance to answer them. This is one of the first times in my memory where that level of inquiry actually occurred, and that speaks loudly to the transparency issue.
So I'm going to piggyback on that. And Luttrell, this is a question for you, and I don't know if we can do this or not. So one of the things that in the process last year, so we asked the questions, the school board answered them, but then we couldn't post them online until we had either a joint finance committee meeting or a board of supervisors meeting. Is there any reason that the questions couldn't be posted online, and then as soon as the school board answers come in there online, because then everyone would then be, the community would be able to see them, so that when you guys get them at the Board of Supervisors, the community's already seen them and can ask about them? Is there any prohibition, because they're not generated from actions in a board meeting, they're generated by questions that you ask?
Yeah, I think at that point, what we could do is post them on our webpage in some fashion, because we don't have a board docs. Board docs is only for the Board of Supervisors, and we don't have any access for any other committees, whether it's Wetlands Board or BZA or Planning Commission.
So could we post
So-
them under the joint finance?
So we
Or-
could look at our webpage and see what we can do there.
Okay,
So-
because that would, I think, right, so that gets to the issue of, if, let's say the budget comes, I'm making this up, so I'm not speaking on behalf of the school. If the budget comes in February 15th, and there's a series of questions that get asked, those could get posted on the website, sent over to the school board. The school board's answers could come back by, let's say, March 1st. You don't have to wait until the Board of Supervisors meeting in March to post those answers. You can post them on the website. They don't become part of the public record until they're voted on in the minutes, but at least then the community can see that, and they can come with questions if they ask. Okay. So we can take that for action as a way to maybe help expedite. Plus, the more eyes that look at the questions, maybe it's easier to get them answered too. Kind of like crowdsourcing the questions
Yeah.
without a crowdsourcing tool.
It increases the turn.
Okay,
Yeah, you're not waiting a month to get answers.
Okay.
You're getting answers in 2 weeks.
thank you. We'll look at that then.
Good idea.
Okay.
Didn't we have our meetings, what they were, once a month? That's a lot of time in between sitting down and discussing. When you're trying to get a budget approved 30 days is just too long. We need a much shorter time period, and we need everyone involved. We don't have anybody involved here from the school board tonight. So that's what we need. We need to have meetings more often so we can discuss things. That'll speed up the time frame. Everyone's just going to have to get involved, even though you may not want to attend.
Well, I'm going to speak up on this. Board of Supervisors needs to put it to expectations to all departments on what this county can afford. You know, you come to us and you got a want of $1.5 million extra for your budget. We know that from the start before it comes to us. This county can't afford to do that all at one time. And to me, that needs to be communicated right up front. Hey, present us with a budget, but we don't have $1 million this year to give you. We don't have $1.5 million this year to give you. And head it off before it starts.
Take $1.5 million, that's about a 5-cent tax increase.
And that was, we talking about time last year. You know, when we decide on budgets and you have an ask like that, if you know you can't afford it, we need to communicate it right up front. We can't afford that. Go back to the drawing board, come back with something that's more realistic and doable, what this county can afford. That's what we need to do right up front.
Yeah, that's probably what we need to do.
All right, I wrote that down. Okay,
We can make that a priority on our next board meeting.
which is next week.
I mean, I hate for people to stand before us and they present, and we kind of sitting up here like, I don't know how we're going to do that.
We've been making quite a few changes and things,
So.
and I think the changes are going to help. We can certainly make that a priority. I don't want to have to keep telling the taxpayer, well, you got $1.5 million here, we're going to raise your taxes 5 cents, and then they want to know why. How can I justify the 5 cents? That's the big problem right there.
I don't disagree at all. I don't want 5 cents added to mine.
Nobody wants 5 cents.
Nobody.
And that's only at one agency. And it's still more agencies coming. You know, we're looking at 10, 15, 20 cents sometimes, and we have to keep trimming it down. It's too much.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the second item. The second item is the management review. So one of the things that Dr. Blizzard and I had talked about last year was in this process, we had focused on the process getting to the budget approval. And one of the things that we wanted to do this year, and I'm going to only speak for myself now, to continue on is to look at how the budget's being managed. Because that informs then how what might be needed for the next budget. So I have been doing some analysis based on the public documents that are presented at the school board meetings. And there are a couple areas, there are 3 areas in particular that I'd like to highlight. You have a chart in front of you, and for those in the audience, there was a chart or 2 that was up front. And what this is the left-hand side, the number is what the school budget request was last year when they came to you. The superintendent allocation of the approved amount is Luttrell. Last year, the Board of Supervisors voted to give the school board appropriation in 2 budget resolutions. And at the June 21st meeting, I think it was, or 18th meeting, it was a lump sum, and then the school board was going to come back and say how they wanted, the school board, I use them interchangeably, it may not be appropriate, was going to come back and say how they wanted the money distributed. So what you see under the superintendent allocation of the approved amount is how the superintendent allocated the money that was approved. So the Board of Supervisors approved 97% of the budget that was requested last year. There was about $613,000 that was cut. The superintendent cut $730,000 from instruction, technology, and building, the building areas. Added money to administration, transportation, and O&M. And when I say added, I mean added money that was above what was initially requested. So if you noticed under administration, the original request was $1.4 million. After the Board of Supervisors cut the school's budget by $613,000, there was money added to that account, not taken away. So magic was done, or there's some serious questions that need to be asked, because the $730,000 that was cut from instruction, technology, and building, the superintendent was still able to fund a 3% salary increase and a 7.2% insurance rate increase, which equaled roughly $500 and some odd thousand. So if you cut almost $500,000 out of that, $600,000 out of that category, $612,000 out of that category, and you were still able to fund $500,000, unless my math is wrong, you asked for $1 million too much. So if you make a cut, you cannot further cut and still manage to raise, to cover salaries and insurance. And just so you know, traditionally, that instruction line item has been verified not only by the Fox accountants, the county accountants, whatever the county firm, Robinson, okay, the county accountants. The forensic audit also found that up until 2022, the instruction line was $13 million a year. In 23 and 24, it ballooned to 15 and then to 16. Yet if you look at the Department of Education website, there have only been 3 teacher positions added over those years. I don't know how the math for adding 3 teachers positions equals almost $4 million addition in that account. So that's one thing that I noticed, and I wanted to share with this body. Again, this is the Joint Finance Committee meeting. There's going to be some recommendations that come further on, because it's unclear. One of the things that's very unclear is how many positions we actually have in the school, and I'm going to get to that in a second. So the next item I wanted to talk about was an analysis of the monthly reports that are approved at the school board for monthly expenditures and revenue. So again, beautiful transparency. Every month, the school board is in receipt of a report on revenue and a report on expenditures. The revenue reports had a little bit of a blip in them in October. So I've been keeping a spreadsheet. Every month I add up what the revenue is in each category and then what's reported by the school. Those two numbers don't always match. And more than likely, Mary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably some kind of weird accounting thing. So the revenue reported might be $10. I'm sorry, the revenue when you add it up might be $10, but the revenue reported by the school might only be $8. I don't know. I'm assuming it's an accounting issue up until I read the forensic audit, and I'll get to that in a second. So what I did was I added up across the months. So for September, October, and November, the revenue figures were a little bit different. I asked Mrs. Booth, I had a series of questions that I had asked her, and she very kindly and very promptly got back to me and asked for some more detail, which I gave her, and it turns out somehow the wrong report was posted. So in November, the school board approved a revised revenue report for the month of September that was $2 million less. So the September report reported revenue of X. Add that to October, add that to July, August. And then all of a sudden in November, they revised the report and there's $2 million missing. Not only is there $2 million missing, there are about 5 different accounting lines that disappeared. So I went back to the finance director and I asked about them. I went to the December school board meeting and I asked about it. So far, the information hasn't been forthcoming about where that $2 million went. I suspect, and this is my suspicion, Mrs. Booth was very transparent about the money that the county was going to get returned. I think in September or October, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody knows, she came in and said there was $1.4 million in reimbursements that had already been received and another $600,000 that should be received by the end of the month. That equals $2 million. Knowing a little bit about the federal budgeting process, I suspect what happened was the revenue from the federal government or maybe even the state came in and it was booked in September and it should have been booked in June. That's probably what happened. Well, that is Karen Pica's suspicion because there's no documentation to show that that would be true. So what normally would happen is the June revenue report for June of 2024 would be revised, and Drew, you've got a background on this too, would be revised and reposted to show a $2 million plus up. That hasn't happened yet. Now, I understand there's an interim finance director at the school, so maybe they haven't gotten around to it since November. But what we have is essentially $2 million that has disappeared off the school's books. That money likely is what should be returned to the county. Now, once we get the county audit, if that money truly is an error in which year it was reported, the county audit will show a $2 million surplus for the schools that will need to be returned to the county. If not, we have $2 million that disappeared, plus we have information in each of those line items that are no longer being reported. This is not new to the school board. I have brought this up in 2 different school board hearings. You can see them online. So one of the areas there that is a concern is we not only have this magic happening where you can cut $600,000 and still manage to provide raises and increase insurance, we also have $2 million that has disappeared off the books based on posted revenue reports that come out of the school financial system. And then the third thing that I wanted to add in terms of observations, last month when the auditor came in, the Board of Supervisors took some actions regarding invoices for accounts that were overspent. I guess that's the best way to say it. There are currently 2 school funds that are in the red, and they're in the red by a lot. They're the federal funds, and I think it's like probably the cafeteria, I'm not sure. Anyway, it's not the operating funds, it's 2 other funds. I raise that because those funds are now being spent in the red. The revenue likely will come in at some point. However, should the revenue come in less than what's anticipated, that money's already out the door and it needs to be made up from somewhere. Based on what we heard and saw in the forensic audit, for 3 years now, the school has been overspending their categories. So if money continues to be spent in those 2 funds and the revenue does not keep up with it, which the county auditor last year told us, very gently, that we had less revenue than anticipated in the school system, if that happens again, am I going to get caught paying for their over expenses? Are you going to get caught? Because if you're in the red, the money's already out the door. So those were a couple things. I also have been keeping track of where we're at with funding for the school. There has been carryover. There's been carryover and additional money provided to the school system in the amount of just over $1 million, right? The carryover was from, I think, the lunch money, not the lunch money, cafeteria. There was a grant for vision and a grant for cameras. So the school has already received an additional $1 million. That carryover should probably be accounted for. There should be some other spending that doesn't happen because of that. But again, that has to work its way through. Before I get to the recommendations that I would like to make based on that, I also want to touch briefly on the audit. I think the audit team, the forensic audit team, did an excellent presentation. I thank the Board of Supervisors for taking action. There's more action that needs to be taken, whatever the corrective action plan that's being developed. There's some serious issues in here that need to be addressed before the budget is approved, particularly with respect to positions. So one of the things that the audit has raised for me is We have people that we're paying, and do we know they exist? They have no contract, they have no completed documentation, there are no background checks on file. We have a significant amount of increased spending and positions in the transportation and the O&M area. So when I get to the recommendations, I'm going to make a recommendation that deals with finding out exactly how many people we have. But I'd like to pause, because I threw a ton of information at you. Before I get to questions from other folks, what may I have said that's in error, or that you would like me to research more, or that causes some other questions?
I want some clarification on something. You got 6 categories here, it's actually 7 categories that the board put the money in. In question, lawful. For an example, on instruction, she gave the figures of the 16,041, 784, and it got changed to 15,429, 510. And I guess clarification of what I need is within those categories, money was changed from category to category. The board has put the school system in categories, and before they can move money from one category to the other, they're supposed to come back to the board.
Correct.
None of this took place. They never come back to the board.
Initially, because the way the budget was adopted or approved, and due to the amount that it was cut, the board had decided not to put the money into the categories specifically, and asked me to go back to the school division to see where they would like those monies how they would like those to be placed in the categories. That information was brought back to the board for you all.
Okay, that's
So-
why I wanted the clarification.
But Mr. Brand, I would argue that you were taken advantage of, because the board cut the school's budget. The transportation request was initially 1.501.
Right.
After the board cut the budget, the school increased that line item. Now, it is the school's prerogative and the school board's prerogative, the superintendent's prerogative, to request that those categories be what the amount was in those categories. I find it a little disingenuous that the board cut the school's funding, and all the cuts came out of instruction and technology. There was a little bit of a cut that came out of the building and site. So the two areas that directly impact the students the most got cut the most. $612,000 was taken out of the instruction line item. And again, you were still able to fund $500,000 in raises and health insurance. So how much fluff was there in that line item? And for the board's awareness, and Mr. Tadlock as well, I have a massive spreadsheet that I have created that contains every single line item, every chart of accounts line item, the dollar amount in that line item for the last 3-4 years. So I'm able to look for every year, how much was for Blue Cross in instruction, how much is for Blue Cross, how much is for FICA in transportation. So when you run these numbers, it's a little confusing that sometimes you'll see a significant increase in the salary amount, but not a corresponding increase in FICA. And that is illogical to me, because if you had increasing employees for which you had to pay FICA, the FICA should go up. So some of the questions that were asked last year by the board were along those lines. So when you start going into a deep dive, and again, the positions are so important, and I know you're going to not want to hear it again, but you've got to zero-base this budget one of these years. You've got to do it at least 1 year, because we're in a position right now where if you can fund that much out of a cut, I'm not sure what's going on. So this is where it landed last year, and then this year, the school is asking for an additional $1.5 million. And that $1.5 million, just for awareness, I've done the math. The school is proposing, the school board has not voted on this, but the draft budget they put forward is proposing a 5% increase and a 7 or 8% insurance. I can't remember. I've got it in a formula. If you take the line items that are for salaries for all the categories, and you multiply it by the 5% raise they want to give, they're asking for more money than they need for that raise. So again, I have a math problem with what the school is doing with the budget, because the money that they're asking for to give a 5% raise does not equal the current salary amounts times the 5%. So, again, I'll stop, I'm sorry, I keep giving you more information than you want, but that's part of the analysis that I've been doing behind the scenes on the expenses. Plus, I keep a checkbook for all the ACHs and checks that are put out the door too, so. Is there any additional research that you'd like to see? Any other questions that you have at this time on those?
I'm good.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for thoughts. Do not ask me any questions about the school board budget because I don't build the budget. I'm just looking at what has been published. So from the perspective of transparency, and for those in the audience to know, there's also a website in the county. It's not a county website, it's a citizen website called it's ncsbwatch.org. A lot of information gets posted there, so some of this stuff might be seen there later on. Thoughts, questions?
Well, you have someone that's checking behind you too. I mean, it's your word.
No, I'm happy to give you all my spreadsheets and all my documentation, absolutely.
Have you been to the board? Have you discussed this with the school board?
Yes, publicly for the last 2 months.
You're putting an attack on the kids too, you know?
How? I'm standing up for the
Because,
kids.
I don't know if all these things you're saying are true or not unless I have the school board here or someone representing the school.
Oh, no, I will give you Mr. Long, I guarantee you, I can give you the website that shows there's only been 3 positions increased. That's the Department of Education website state. All this information is derived from the documents that the school board posts every month. This isn't mine, this is the school board accounts. This isn't my information. And yes, I have brought this to the school board since September.
The school board was invited to this, yes?
What was that?
Yes.
Yes, the school board was invited to this meeting, yes?
Yes.
And the school board declined.
Okay, just to
They,
be clear, this wasn't.
they sent
sent
a
to-
letter, I can't remember all the verbiage into it, but they sent a letter declining any of these meetings.
Okay.
Not the full school board, there are 2 reps from the school board. Yeah.
My point is that they were extended a courtesy of attending this meeting and voicing and providing their voice.
Well, it's a joint group, so yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, Mr. Long, I am happy to be sworn under oath and questioned on any of this.
Are you working through the other departments, checking to what's going on in those two? I want you to be fair across the board. Let's not pick on one. Seems like you're attacking one agency, and that's it.
I'm not attacking, what I'm doing is I am
In my
questioning.
opinion, you
Okay,
are.
then we'll go with your language. I'm attacking the school because the school has consistently had, the scores for all the kids have consistently gone down. People in this county can't find kids that can read and can do math to work in their
That's your
jobs.
opinion.
No, that's a survey that was done by the Lancaster Chamber of Commerce. And I don't want my taxes to go up. I've got a vested interest in this because I live on a fixed income. And if the school keeps asking me for $1.5 million every year, if they've decided that they're going to hire janitors instead of service master and it's now costing us more money when I was promised it would cost less, I don't want to lose my
The
home.
service master wasn't doing the job either.
Well, now we've got a position, we've got to pay health insurance.
I know that.
So I'm attacking the largest consumer of taxpayer dollars. I am happy to turn my attention to every other department. Now, again, I'm a volunteer and I only have so many hours in a day. I'm happy to do it.
Seems like you volunteer in that agency, you should volunteer in the rest.
I'm happy to take that on.
Right. I just want things to be fair, not pick on one agency.
Well, I want to pick on the agency that's consuming most of the resources and failing our kids.
You talking about the future too.
I am.
Right.
And why the 3 teachers? We've had a $5 million increase with only 3 teachers? Then let's get some more teachers in there. Why is it costing, where's the rest of the money going? Why is the administration getting more money and not the instructors?
Now, it's a way you can help too.
How?
I remember I went to the board, they said they needed teachers, I found 5 for them. And it's a way to do it, you know?
Well,
It's a way to help them instead of criticizing all the time.
okay, so I can go out and find teachers, but if they don't hire them, I don't think that helps.
They will hire if the position's open.
They told us last year they couldn't hire him because the budget was cut.
Last year, I'm talking about now.
Not for $1.5 million.
Well, you never know. I mean, if you set out, we need to get the school board here and anybody else involved and let them give their opinion too.
I have offered to meet, absolutely, and I have, nothing I'm saying here has not been already shared with the school board.
That's your opinion. I don't know.
You're right, and I have a pretty big opinion.
That's your opinion.
I do. But I got numbers to back it up.
Okay.
I made my career on numbers, so. All right, I will turn my attention to the rest of the county. Luttrell, you're up next.
No.
Anybody else have thoughts?
I have some thoughts. I did read through the audit. I agree with you. The thing that disturbed me the most was the lack of employment contracts. I don't know how we're giving raises if we don't have a documentation on what your duties are or the expectation of your role. So how would you propose 5% raises if I don't know how to measure your performance? We also don't know if they're actually employed, and I'm deeply disturbed that there's no background checks and these children are with their kids. So there's also what I consider in the industry that I work in, a dereliction of duty is what I saw in that audit. And so while I do understand what Mr. Long is saying, I think that we have highlighted something that is actually detrimental to our children. And what is happening here and these budget issues, these overspending, this audit, the only people that are getting hurt by this are the kids. The only people who are profiting from this is what I consider the executive branch.
So we all agree the kids are getting hurt.
The kids are getting the brunt end of this.
And I'm not the one that's hurting the kids, I'm the one that's surfacing the hurt. Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so recommendations. I know that we can give recommendations and then you can choose to take them to the board or not. One recommendation based on both the audit and the documentation here is that the next school budget includes the total number and names of all employees in filled positions, as well as the number of vacant positions by category. Now that should not, I don't think that should be public because it's a name issue, and I don't think you should have personally identifiable information available. You can scrub out the names. So for instruction, there should be a list of all the positions that are filled and all the positions that are vacant. This should not be a heavy lift for the school because there is a report. I can go to the Department of Education website and I can pull down for last year the number of positions that were vacant and the number that were filled. That's where I got there were only 3, right? So if you've got a payroll system, and Mary, if I'm wrong, you can only speak for the county, not the school. Your payroll system will be able to tell you how many checks you're pushing out. That should tell you how many people you have on payroll. So the next school board budget needs to include for each, and the 6th category I think was the, or the 7th.
Cafeteria.
Yeah, and I always exclude that one because it's supposed to be self-funding, and sometimes I can't understand that one. So for each one of these, there should be a accounting of each of those positions. It's starting to get to a little bit zero. It's not asking them to justify the positions, it's just saying what positions are currently filled, and that should just be a payroll run. And there should also be in that list an accounting of how many current employees have contracts and full documentation on file. The school's response to the forensic audit was that they were moving to a fully automated HR system that would contain all the documents of that employee. And that was to be completed in fiscal year 25. That's this year. So all those people should have a contract on file. There needs to be a name with the position and full documentation for that employee. And again, that's not going to be public. That's something that, should be private. There should also be full revenue accounting for each category and major line of accounting for the past 4 years. I don't think that will be that serious of a lift because our friendly auditors were able to generate some charts that contained some information. Now, they did say also that there was revenue that was in the school financial system that is not being reported to the board. Meaning, and Mr. Fisher, if I'm wrong, meaning they saw evidence of revenue that was in that system, otherwise they wouldn't have made that statement. Meaning all the school board needs to do is punch the button, the school, and push it out. And the reason that you want the revenue by each one of these lines is because if there is revenue that is behind the scenes, for what is it being used? How is it being employed? If you're able to take a $612,000 cut out of this line item and still cover $500 and some odd thousand dollars in raises and insurance, where did that money come from? The school is not a for-profit institution. It is not supposed to have extra money. Any extra money it has is supposed to come back to taxpayers. So there's 2 recommendations. The third one's a little, I'm not sure. It deals with expenditures, and what I originally had thought was having expenditures for each line of accounting over the past 4 years. After what the auditors found with respect to the sorry state of the records, which, by the way, Code of Virginia, 22.1, Section 8, requires appropriate records be kept for all school funds. So we've got a problem there that needs to be fixed. If the auditors couldn't figure out what the expenses were, I'm not sure it's going to be a good ask to ask the school to do it, particularly if we have an interim finance director. So my third recommendation was going to be around expenditures. But I don't know if the board wants to ask for those expenditures because of the significant lift the auditors had. We just went through this audit. We've got the county audit. It may be a little bit too much to ask for all the past years. Maybe it's just a straight up what's going on this year, which they should just be able to give you. The reports that you get every month that say where they're at with respect to, 10%, 15% spending down, that's based on their expenditure reports. Now, every month, the school board approves they don't approve. The school board receives reports on expenses and revenue. There's no action they need to take, and the expenses always exceed the revenue. I think I might change my recommendation on the fly here to be an accounting of what the expenses to date are, along with comparison of what they were last year at this time. Because what you can then do is see if the expenses to date are higher than they were last year, and last year's county auditor found that the revenue for the school decreased, you've got a larger gap that's going to have to be filled. If we can get an expense to date for this year compared with an expense to date for last year, we know how much of a risk the county is in for having to cover additional expenses by the school.
That's already been spent.
Pardon me?
That's already been spent, to your point earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
Expenses to date.
It's already, yeah. It's already out the
Yep,
door.
right.
Yep.
Because you want to be able to, if we start having a gap that does this,
Yeah.
at some point we've got to cut it off.
Right.
I think comparing it to last year is more doable than trying to go back 3 or 4 years. We got to look at this thing, what's going on in 2019 to this date. Yeah. And I'm not trying to overlook it. A lot of things weren't right. We can't keep going back and beating up 2019, 2020 if we're trying to fix
Now.
now.
Okay. All right, so let's change that recommendation to expenses to
So
date. Okay.
I think things probably, according to the auditors, a little more in line with last year. Do a comparison.
Now, we still want the full revenue accounting, right? You don't want just the revenue, yeah.
And I'll,
Okay.
I'll go along with that, but
Okay, expenses to date compared to last year. Okay.
because
Yeah,
I
you
just,
should do it year over year.
right, because I mean,
Yeah.
we're being told it's not enough documentation to support 2019, 2020, so forth. So
Bring it on.
it's no need to keep beating that up.
Okay.
a year-over-year is valuable and standard.
Right, it should be.
Yeah.
What was that?
It's called a year-over-year.
Year-over-year
Right.
comparison,
Where you take
yeah.
your expenses from last year and you go, what are we gonna, and
And
you
you-
compare it.
you do it as
Versus
business.
just pulling a number out of the air.
You do have to do it as business because you have to track your
Right.
quarterlies, yeah,
But
okay.
Clearly, these guys are.
Couldn't you just go back to last year's, let's call it January, expenditure report that's already out there and look at what that expenditure report was last year compared to this year?
I could do that based on,
Are you going to ask for the detail, or you just want year-to-date total expenditures? Because that's an easy one.
but I could do that now based on what's out there publicly.
Right, exactly.
I'm concerned, based on the revised revenue report that was posted, if those expenditures are, right, 100% accurate too. So they had to repost the revenue report and line items came out. I have not done a month-to-month comparison for the expenditure reports. I've got a checkbook that I'm keeping. So I think it's better coming from the school. I can absolutely do that as a counterpoint, like if the school information comes in. But my concern is with me as a citizen creating that rather than the school,
Yeah.
then it's not what the board
The
needs.
school needs to do it,
Yeah.
and if you continue to go behind it and do the same thing, it's checks and balances. It's, you can compare your numbers to their numbers, and if it's a difference in the numbers, then we need to figure out why there's a difference. But, you know, I would let the school handle their end on that.
Any other thoughts on that part?
So that would be a recommendation for prior to the budget being approved, or?
Yeah, so thank you. So the recommendations, the three that I just made, are for consideration for you to bring to the board before the school board budget gets voted on, along with the corrective action plan,
Well, it can be a tool to help with the school budget.
however you choose to use it.
Right.
Sorry. However you choose to use it. Yep.
It could be a good tool, a good resource for the board and for the school.
And for the community,
Yeah.
I mean, it helps. Okay. That's all. Is there any, yep, that's, so, Mr. Haney, you had mentioned that you thought maybe we should have more regular meetings. I don't know if that was something you wanted to task me as a joint finance person with, or if that's something you're going to try to tackle as a board. I don't know what our next move is.
Well, when we get into this budget and we're starting to look at, it's not so bad right this minute. As soon as we start getting information back, we need to stay up onto it. We can't look at it today and wait 30 days down the line to look at it again. We got to be doing it on a weekly basis. And that way we can, if we get answers to questions today, we can give a reply back if we have other questions for those answers that we were given. And instead of dragging it out months and months, should be able to get a whole lot more work done in 30 days than what we were getting.
So on that note then, last year, one of the things that this body did, that Dr. Blizzard and I did, we took the chart of accounts that was approved by the school board in January, and the first set of questions was developed off that chart of accounts.
Yes.
Now, the school board has not voted on a budget yet, to my knowledge. So I don't know if the chart of accounts, there has been a chart of accounts that was presented to the school board in December, and there were no modifications made to it in January, but there has not yet been a vote taken on that chart of accounts. Does this body want me to start looking at that, or start building, I already looked at that. Start building questions on that chart of account, or wait, because the school may still be making modifications to that?
I'd wait,
Yeah,
because if you get too ahead, the school board changes up, that's going to redirect your questions. Some of your questions may not even,
Okay,
Fine.
so once they vote on the chart of accounts, then I'll take that as the green light to start the first set of questions on behalf of the Joint Finance Committee and get that to you all.
That
Okay,
would be your green light right there.
okay. I can take that action. And Mr. Long, if you want me to look at all the rest of them, I'm happy to do that too.
Yeah. That'd be-
What are the next steps with the audit?
Well, the board members have to sit down and discuss that. And we'll be doing that at our next board meeting.
But to date, from our last meeting, from an audit, you've sent out the email requesting the action plan from the treasurer's office and from the school system. So you're
That's correct.
getting that information, so that's been sent out.
Yeah, and basically what I did, I took the action items within the forensic audit and created another sheet that had an implementation date or planned implementation date and additional comments.
All right, now have you gotten a reply back?
I have not, but I did send that out, requesting information back for the meeting next week.
So because it's 30 days, and we don't want dragging of our feet again. We want to get this thing moving. This has to be taken care of before we're going to approve the
Yeah,
budget.
no, I mean, it's been sent, and then we had the meeting end of January, and it was sent out shortly thereafter, so it hadn't been quite a month.
At what point do we get the state involved? I mean, so we have books. So what I heard is that books were closed and then revised. So typically what you do after you close a book, you do what's called a bridge, where you say, this is the number we had, this is a new number, and here's how we got from the old number to the new number, and all of that information is public. So, but what I've heard is that the books were published and changed, but there's no record of the original books. Is that correct?
That's what this audit report says.
That's what the auditor said.
The audit report says,
These are basic, I'm not an accountant, but I do business stuff. This is basic accounting. So, State Department of Finance, where do we bring someone involved that can start looking at this? Because this is dereliction of duty, gross negligence. This is serious. And I do business consulting, and my specialty is rescuing struggling businesses, big and small, all over the world. And if I came into this situation, this is a catastrophic failure. And in the industry I work in, people lose their jobs over this. This is very serious. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about it is that it impacts our kids. If this was road maintenance, I wouldn't be so upset about it. These are our children. So when do we take it to the state?
well, what we've done so far, as Mr. Tadlock said, we've done a corrective action plan. And he sent that out. We haven't gotten replies back yet. All right, that has to be done, which is the items that were listed in this audit report, forensic audit report. You know, we have to have this information, and we need, in that report, it has to be who's going to be responsible for it and a time frame onto it. We haven't seen any of that information yet. And I expect to be seeing that at our board meeting. We have to have it. You know, we don't want to keep dragging our feet. We want to get this corrected, see what we're going to do, and then we'll carry on with it.
I think also, the auditing firm identified action plans in place, the county. Luttrell's been instructed to follow up with that and come up with how that's going to be handled. But it goes a step beyond that. Timeline. We need to look at if we don't see any corrections by June. And I think it's being fair. Other steps need to be taken. That's where the board needs to have an action plan on what steps are going to be taken after that timeline. And that needs to be a discussion at our next meeting.
Want to be on the agenda to discuss.
And it needs to be in place. We don't need to let it go for 6 months and decide to take another 6 months to fix it.
You're correct. You're correct.
Okay. One last comment, and then,
I want to add on to what Mr. Brand just said. We've been fighting this battle for 3, 4, 5 years, and the forensic audit basically confirmed many items that we were suspicious of, just in terms of how things were being reported and whether or not the schools were adhering to the rules of the game. And we found out that they're not. And so to Mr. Brandt's point, the time for a lot of yak and discussion is over. Now it's time to actually put an action plan into place and make it happen and adhere to it. We can't be wishy-washy. This isn't personal against anybody on the school board or anybody in administration. This is tax dollars and kids' education. And the time for talking about it, I mean, I know you guys have to have discussion and come to a conclusion, but we can't wait 3 or 4 more months to come to that conclusion.
and gentlemen, I continue to make myself available. I don't know what the future is for the Joint Finance Committee if it's not joint, but as an interested citizen, I will continue to make my time and analysis capabilities available for any and all aspects of this. And I will accept Mr. Long's challenge to turn to the county budget. I'm not sure when I'll be able to squeeze that in because it's seed planting time soon, but I accept your challenge and I will certainly turn to that. So Luttrell, you're up next now. So if there's nothing else that you all need from me before your next meeting, I'm happy, if you want, I can jot down the recommendations out. Morgan, do you have the recommendations I made? Are you good?
Please do that.
Oh, jot them down? Okay.
Yeah, please jot them down. And also, we want to set another meeting date while we're right here today.
Okay.
Same day in March, March the 5th, same time, same place. Is that all right for everybody?
Caught me off guard. Let me look at the handy dandy electronic device. What are we saying, March 5th?
March 5th,
Oh, well, yes, I'm free. 5:30?
5:30. All right, that's all right for everybody?
Brand, does that work for you? Yeah. All right, so that being said, our business for tonight is concluded. Thank you all for your attention, and thank you, everyone, for an engaging conversation. Thank you. Toodles online.